Camp Dachau Displaced Person Center, Bavaria. Germany. The spring sunlight filters through the high windows of the converted military barracks, casting long shadows across the wooden floor where 23-year-old Greta Muller sits on a narrow cot, clutching her 6-month-old daughter Anna against her chest. Her hands tremble not from cold, the room maintains a surprisingly comfortable temperature, but from the uncertainty of what comes next. Around her, 37 other German women wait in silence, their faces etched with the same apprehension that keeps Greta's heart hammering against her ribs. Through the thin walls, she hears American voices speaking in that unfamiliar rapid English, and her mind races with possibilities she cannot control. She presses her lips to Anna's soft hair, breathing in that innocent baby smell of milk and soap. Real soap. The Americans provided it yesterday, along with clean towels and fresh water, gestures that confused her more than they comforted her. Greta's husband Wilhelm, a Wehrmacht soldier, disappeared somewhere on the Eastern Front 18 months ago. She received no letters, no confirmation, only silence that spoke its own terrible language. Now she finds herself classified as the wife of a German prisoner of war, though Wilhelm's status remains unknown, waiting for American officials to decide her fate and, more importantly, Anna's fate. The propaganda she heard throughout the war echoes in her mind stories of what Allied forces supposedly did to German civilians, to women, to children. She spent the previous night rehearsing words in broken English, preparing desperate pleas she might need to make. But when the American medical officer entered the room this morning with his clipboard and calm demeanor, conducting what he called routine health assessments, something felt different from what she expected. He smiled at Anna. He asked Greta if the baby needed anything. The disconnect between her expectations and this reality creates a cognitive dissonance that leaves her more frightened than comforted, because she does not yet understand what pattern is emerging. What happens when everything you've been taught to fear turns into something you never imagined? Why would an occupying force treat their former enemies most vulnerable with unexpected dignity? Before we continue this remarkable true story, if you're fascinated by untold World War II histories that challenge everything we thought we knew about human nature during humanity's darkest hours, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and like this video. What happens next will completely transform your understanding of the immediate post-war period, and you won't want to miss a single detail. Greta expects separation. The propaganda minister's broadcasts throughout 1944 repeatedly warned German civilians about Allied occupation plans, though she never fully believed the most extreme claims. Her education and Catholic upbringing taught her to question authoritarian narratives. The sheer volume of warnings created an ambient anxiety she cannot easily dismiss. Women in her neighborhood in Munich whispered stories they heard from refugees fleeing from the West, families divided, children taken to orphanages, mothers sent to work camps while officials decided their fates. Whether these stories contained truth or emerged from collective fear, they shaped expectations nonetheless. She expects processing that strips away her identity as a mother and reduces her to a number, a problem to be solved through bureaucratic efficiency. The German military machine operated that way. She witnessed it firsthand. When Wilhelm received his conscription notice in 1942, the Wehrmacht officials showed no interest in the fact that she was pregnant, that Wilhelm worked as a schoolteacher, that his students needed him. The system consumed individuals and transformed them into standardized units serving a larger machine. She assumes the American occupation will function similarly, just painted in different colors and speaking a different language. The women around her share their own expectations in hushed conversations during the long nights. 31-year-old Hild, whose husband served in the Luftwaffe, heard that Americans send German women to labor programs in France, rebuilding infrastructure their husbands helped destroy. 27-year-old Marguerite, mother of 2 daughters ages 3 and 5, fears that authorities will judge her unfit because her apartment in Stuttgart was destroyed by bombing, leaving her homeless. She reasons that officials seeking orderly solutions will place her children in stable institutional settings while she works to establish new housing. The logic seems sound, even humane in a cold bureaucratic way, which makes it more frightening. because it could happen through proper procedures rather than cruelty. Greta's own mother died during a bombing raid in January 1945, and her father, a postal worker, suffered a stroke shortly after and remains partially paralyzed in a Munich hospital. She has no family support system, no resources beyond what she carries in a single battered suitcase. Her apartment building sustained damage that makes it uninhabitable, the landlord told remaining tenants they must vacate by June. Everything that defined her stable middle-class life disappeared in the span of 18 months. When American forces occupied Munich in late April, she initially hid in a church basement with Anna, but a Catholic priest convinced her to register with occupation authorities, insisting that cooperation offered better outcomes than avoidance. The registration process brought her to this displaced persons facility, a converted military installation that once housed German troops. The transformation happened quickly. American engineers removed military equipment, installed additional plumbing, organized the space into family sections and individual quarters for women without male relatives. The efficiency impressed Greta, even as it unsettled her. She expects this efficiency to eventually require difficult decisions about resource allocation, about who receives help and who must manage independently, about which children stay with mothers and which enter institutional care until stable situations emerge. She watches how other mothers interact with their children, noting the forced cheerfulness they maintain during daylight hours and the quiet sobbing she hears after dark. 25-year-old Elizabeth, whose husband died at Stalingrad, maintains such rigid composure that her face seems frozen in a polite mask. She insists to anyone who listens that everything will work out properly, that authorities make fair decisions based on facts and circumstances. Greta recognizes this as a coping mechanism, a way to maintain psychological control when external circumstances remain chaotic and uncertain. She employs her own version, memorizing English phrases, practicing scenarios, preparing herself mentally for what she assumes comes next. The historical context surrounds her even if she doesn't fully comprehend it yet. Germany surrendered unconditionally on May 8, 1945, exactly 1 week ago. The Nazi government collapsed completely, leaving no central authority to manage the massive displacement crisis affecting millions of people. Approximately 7 million displaced persons fill territory across Germany, Austria, and surrounding areas. Concentration camp survivors, forced laborers, prisoners of war, refugees, and German civilians like Greta, whose homes and lives were destroyed by war. The Allied forces suddenly bear responsibility for managing this humanitarian crisis while simultaneously occupying and demilitarizing a defeated nation. Greta knows none of the specific numbers, but she senses the scope through observation. The displaced persons facility houses approximately 300 people, mostly women and children, with new arrivals processed daily. She watches American soldiers and civilian aid workers move through the facility with purposeful efficiency, conducting health screenings, distributing supplies, organizing meal schedules. The operation demonstrates planning and resource allocation at a scale that impresses her despite her anxiety. Someone designed this system to function at capacity, which means authorities anticipated the displacement crisis and prepared responses. This preparation suggests intention beyond simple reaction, though Greta cannot yet determine what that intention might mean for her and Anna. But then something unexpected happened that would completely transform everything. Greta Muller thought she understood about her daughter's future. On May 16, 1945, the day after her initial processing, an American civilian administrator named Dorothy Harrison enters the women's section, accompanied by a German-speaking translator. Dorothy, a 38-year-old social worker from Philadelphia, arrives carrying a leather notebook and wearing practical work clothes rather than a military uniform. Her presence itself signals something different. Greta expected military officials making military decisions, not civilian professionals conducting what Dorothy describes as family welfare assessments. The terminology sounds almost absurdly normal, as if they exist in peacetime circumstances where social workers make routine home visits to ensure child welfare. Dorothy asks Greta about Anna's feeding schedule, her sleep patterns, whether she shows any signs of illness or distress. The questions focus entirely on the baby's well-being rather than Greta's background, political affiliations, or wartime activities. Dorothy examines Anna gently, checking her reflexes, looking at her skin tone and eyes, asking when she last received medical attention. When Greta mentions that she struggled to find adequate nutrition during the final months of pregnancy and Anna's early infancy, Dorothy makes notes without judgment or criticism. She asks what foods Greta currently eats, whether she produces sufficient breast milk, whether Anna accepts supplemental feeding. Starting tomorrow, Dorothy explains through the translator, you'll receive additional rations specifically formulated for nursing mothers. We have condensed milk, vitamin supplements, and dried eggs allocated for families with infants under 1 year. You'll also meet with our pediatric nurse twice weekly for Anna's wellness checks. We brought specialized medical supplies from the United States specifically for infant care. Greta stares at her, processing words that seem to describe a reality disconnected from her expectations. She waits for the conditions, the requirements, the bureaucratic necessities that will make this support contingent on some action she must take. But Dorothy simply continues explaining the program, noting that Greta will receive a supply card allowing her to obtain specific items from the facility's distribution center. She mentions that American Red Cross volunteers operate a childcare program each afternoon, giving mothers several hours to rest, attend English classes, or participate in vocational training sessions that teach practical skills for eventual employment. The goal, Dorothy says with the translator conveying her steady, professional tone, is to keep families together and help mothers achieve self-sufficiency. We find that children thrive best with their mothers, and mothers function best when they have adequate support and resources. This isn't charity, it's investment in stable family units that will form the foundation of reconstruction. The philosophy embedded in these words strikes Greta with almost physical force. She expected separation based on efficiency. Instead, she encounters policy explicitly designed to maintain family bonds as the primary organizing principle. The disconnect feels so profound that she struggles to trust it, wondering if this represents temporary kindness that will evaporate once resources become strained or political priorities shift. Yet Dorothy's demeanor suggests institutional backing rather than individual generosity. She refers to programs, allocated resources, organizational structures that extend beyond personal choice. That evening, Greta receives her first supplemental rations, 3 cans of condensed milk, a package of dried eggs, vitamin tablets, and something unexpected that will become deeply significant, a bar of Hershey's chocolate. The chocolate seems frivolous compared to the practical nutritional items, yet its presence communicates something important. Someone in the supply chain decided that nursing mothers deserve not just adequate nutrition, but also small luxuries that acknowledge their humanity beyond basic survival needs. Greta breaks off a single square, letting it melt on her tongue, tasting sweetness she hasn't experienced in over a year. She saves the rest, rationing it across several days, but that first taste begins reshaping her understanding of what this occupation might actually mean. Over the following days, the unexpected pattern continues. On May 18th, an American military doctor examines Anna and declares her remarkably healthy considering the circumstances. He prescribes a vitamin supplement to address mild anemia that likely resulted from Greta's nutritional deficiencies during pregnancy, and he provides detailed instructions for preparing supplemental formula that will support Anna's development. He spends 25 minutes with them, not the rushed processing Greta anticipated, but thorough medical attention that treats Anna as an individual patient deserving comprehensive care. On May 20th, a Red Cross volunteer named Margaret invites Greta to the childcare program. Margaret, a 52-year-old grandmother from Iowa, worked as an elementary school teacher before volunteering for post-war relief work. She demonstrates genuine affection for Anna, showing Greta how the childcare space includes clean mattresses for nap time, toys donated by American families, and picture books in both English and German. Margaret explains that volunteers receive training in infant care and child development, and that the program maintains strict ratios to ensure adequate supervision. 1 volunteer for every 4 children under age 2. You need rest, Margaret tells Greta through the translator. Motherhood is exhausting under the best circumstances, and these are hardly the best circumstances. Let us help you so you can be the best mother possible for Anna. That's what we're here for." The generosity embedded in this offer challenges everything Greta constructed in her mind about enemy occupation. She begins attending the English classes held in the facility's converted dining hall, spending 2 hours 3 afternoons per week learning vocabulary and grammar from American volunteers. The curriculum focuses on practical communication, how to ask for medical help, how to shop for food, how to discuss employment opportunities. The teachers treat the German women with patience and respect, never mentioning the war, never assigning blame, simply teaching language as a tool for navigating a transformed world. Greta notices the same pattern throughout the facility. American personnel interact with German women without hostility or condescension. When 29-year-old Elle struggles with depression following her husband's confirmed death at Normandy, American staff arrange for her to speak with a psychologist rather than dismissing her distress as personal weakness. When Hild's 8-year-old son requires treatment for a persistent cough, American medical staff provide the same care they would give American children, including antibiotics that remain scarce across war-damaged Germany. The consistency of this treatment suggests policy. Rather than random kindness, someone designed these programs with specific philosophy and intention. Evidence supporting this unexpected reality exists in numbers that Greta doesn't yet know but that shape the policies affecting her life. The United States military government prepared for occupation responsibilities beginning in 1944, developing detailed plans for managing the humanitarian crisis that would follow German defeat. These plans allocated substantial resources specifically for family welfare programs, recognizing that stable family units would prove essential for long-term reconstruction and preventing future conflict. By May 1945, the American military government established 437 displaced persons facilities across the American occupation zone, housing approximately 1.9 million people. These facilities received priority allocation of medical supplies, food resources, and personnel specifically trained in civilian relief work. The military government allocated $47 million specifically for displaced persons relief programs in fiscal year 1945 alone, with substantial additional funding planned for subsequent years. This represented significant financial commitment during a period when military operations still continued in the Pacific Theater and when American political leaders faced pressure to reduce overseas spending. Supplemental nutrition programs that Greta benefits from emerged from specific medical research conducted by American and British authorities in 1944 and early 1945, studies of maternal and infant health in war-affected populations demonstrated that targeted nutritional support for nursing mothers produced dramatic improvements in infant survival and development outcomes. Based on this research, military government authorities allocated specific rations for nursing mothers that included approximately 3,200 calories daily compared to the standard 2,000-calorie ration for adult women. These enhanced rations included condensed milk, dried eggs, vitamin supplements, and occasional items like chocolate that provided both caloric density and psychological benefit. Child care programs operating in displaced persons facilities employed approximately 2,300 trained volunteers across the American zone by June 1945, with plans to expand to over 4,000 volunteers by year's end. These volunteers received standardized training in child development, basic health monitoring, and trauma-informed care techniques developed specifically for children affected by war. The programs maintain strict adult-to-child ratios, 1 adult for every 4 children under age 2, 1 adult for every 6 children ages 2 to 5, and 1 adult for every 8 children ages 6 to 12. These ratios exceeded standards in many American childcare facilities of the era, reflecting commitment to quality care rather than minimal adequacy. Medical care for displaced persons received similar resource priority. The American military government deployed 347 military doctors and 892 nurses, specifically to civilian relief operations by June 1945. separate from personnel assigned to military hospitals treating American service members. Displaced persons facilities maintained medical clinics with pediatric specialists, providing care that many German civilians couldn't access during the war years when Nazi authorities prioritized military needs and racially favored populations. Infant mortality rates in American-administered displaced persons camps remained lower than rates in many German hospitals during the late war period, approximately 47 deaths per 1,000 live births compared to estimates of 65 to 80 deaths per 1,000 in the general German population in early 1945. The educational programs, including English language classes, operated under formal curriculum developed by American education specialists in consultation with German-speaking cultural advisors. By July 1945, approximately 18,000 displaced persons across the American zone participated in English language programs, with plans to expand access to over 50,000 participants by December. The curriculum required 120 hours of instruction, covering practical vocabulary, basic grammar, conversational skills, and cultural orientation designed to prepare participants for potential immigration to PIDC, English-speaking countries, or employment with occupation authorities and reconstruction contractors. These programs reflected broader American policy influenced by lessons from World War I and the interwar period. American political and military leaders recognized that the punitive approach taken after World War I contributed to German resentment and economic instability that facilitated the rise of extremism. The emerging American occupation philosophy emphasized reconstruction, stabilization, and integration rather than punishment and exclusion, maintaining family units, providing adequate healthcare and nutrition, and offering educational opportunities all served strategic purposes. Beyond humanitarian concern, stable families meant stable communities, which facilitated effective occupation and eventual transition to sustainable German self-governance. The Geneva Convention protections, while not technically applying to German civilians who were not prisoners of war, influenced American military government policies nonetheless. The 1929 Geneva Convention established standards for prisoner treatment that emphasized adequate nutrition, medical care, and humane conditions. American military government authorities extended similar principles to civilian displaced persons, arguing that these standards represented appropriate treatment for any persons under military authority regardless of technical legal status. This approach reflected American democratic values and practical recognition that creating goodwill among occupied populations would facilitate military government objectives. Food allocation provides specific measurable evidence. Standard displaced persons rations in American facilities provided approximately 2,000 calories daily, comparable to rations for German civilians in areas not experiencing acute shortages. However, the special allocations for nursing mothers, pregnant women, children under 5, and elderly persons with medical needs brought targeted populations to 2,500 to 3,200 calories daily, exceeding nutritional minimums and approaching adequacy standards that supported health rather than merely preventing starvation. By comparison, rations in Soviet-occupied areas of Germany often fell below 1,500 calories daily for general populations, and French-occupied areas struggled with shortages that sometimes reduced rations to 1,200 to 1,400 calories. The chocolate that Greta received represented a small but symbolically significant element of this approach. The American military purchased approximately 24 million Hershey's chocolate bars monthly for military rations by 1945, and military government authorities included chocolate in supplemental rations for nursing mothers in displaced persons facilities, specifically because it provided quick energy, boosted morale, and represented American abundance. Each nursing mother received approximately 2 bars monthly, a small luxury that communicated care beyond mere survival. This seemingly minor detail reflected a broader philosophy that recognized psychological well-being as inseparable from physical health. The chocolate bar becomes Greta's tangible connection to this unexpected reality. She keeps the wrapper even after finishing the first bar, tucking it into Anna's small bundle of clothes as a reminder of the moment when her expectations began transforming. When she receives another bar 2 weeks later, on May 30th, she again rations it carefully, allowing herself one small square each evening after putting Anna to sleep. The ritual provides structure and sweetness during a period otherwise defined by uncertainty about the future. On June 3rd, Greta notices Margaret, the Red Cross volunteer, sharing chocolate with the children in the childcare program. Margaret breaks each bar into small pieces, allowing each child a single square as a special treat after afternoon nap time. The children's faces light up with delight. Several have never tasted chocolate before, and those who remember it from before the war haven't experienced such sweetness in years. Margaret speaks to them gently in halting German, telling them stories about her own grandchildren in Iowa, creating a moment of normalcy and joy that transcends language barriers and national divisions. Greta begins to understand that the chocolate represents more than nutrition or even morale. It symbolizes a philosophy that recognizes human dignity, requires attention to physical needs and emotional well-being, practical support and symbolic gestures of care. The Americans could easily have provided adequate calories through basic staples alone. The inclusion of chocolate demonstrates intentional choice to offer something beyond adequacy, something that acknowledges people's humanity and capacity for experiencing joy even amid difficult circumstances. She observes this philosophy manifesting throughout the facility in various forms. The American staff maintain clean, organized spaces, even though managing hundreds of displaced persons in converted military barracks creates substantial challenges. They provide soap, towels, and basic toiletries, small items that allow people to maintain personal dignity. They organize the dining hall to resemble a restaurant rather than an institutional cafeteria, with tablecloths and simple flower arrangements that create pleasant atmosphere. They arrange furniture in the common areas to facilitate conversation and community rather than efficient processing. Every detail suggests that someone thought carefully about how to treat displaced persons as human beings deserving of comfort and respect rather than problems requiring management. On June 10th, Greta experiences another manifestation of this philosophy when American staff organize a small celebration for Anna's first half-birthday, 6 months old. Several American volunteers, including Dorothy and Margaret, present Greta with a collection of items donated by American families: a soft blanket, several cloth diapers in good condition, a rattle, and a hand-knitted sweater in pale yellow. The sweater came from a woman in Massachusetts who learned about the displaced persons programs and organized her church group to knit items for babies in occupied Germany. The volunteers explain that hundreds of American women participate in such efforts, sending care packages to former enemy civilians out of conviction that children bear no responsibility for war and deserve support regardless of their nationality. Greta accepts these gifts with tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by kindness she never imagined receiving. Margaret hugs her gently, speaking in English that Greta now understands enough to follow. All babies deserve love and care. Anna is a beautiful child, and you're a wonderful mother. We're happy to help you both. The simple affirmation touches something deep in Greta's heart. Throughout the final years of war, she felt judged by Nazi authorities for being insufficiently enthusiastic about military priorities, and she expected judgment from occupation forces for being German. Instead, she encounters acceptance and support focused entirely on her well-being and Anna's needs. The symbolic power of the chocolate and other small kindnesses extends beyond Greta's individual experience. Throughout the facility, she observes similar patterns affecting other women. Hild receives chocolate and uses it to celebrate her daughter's recovery from illness, turning a medical milestone into a moment of joy. Elizabeth shares her chocolate with Marguerite's young daughters, creating a small gesture of friendship that helps both women cope with isolation and grief. The chocolate circulates through informal networks of mutual support, each piece representing not just calories, but human connection and hope that better days might actually come. By mid-June, Greta participates actively in the facility's community life. She attends English classes regularly, her vocabulary and confidence growing steadily. She volunteers to help translate for newer arrivals who struggle to communicate with American staff, using her improving language skills to serve others while strengthening her own abilities. She forms friendships with other young mothers, creating a support network that helps all of them manage the practical and emotional challenges of their circumstances. Anna thrives gaining weight, reaching developmental milestones, showing the secure attachment that emerges when infants receive consistent, loving care. On June 24th, exactly 40 days after Greta first arrived at the facility, clutching Anna in fear, Dorothy Harrison calls her in for a follow-up assessment. Greta enters the meeting nervous but far less frightened than she felt 6 weeks earlier. Dorothy reviews notes from various staff members. The pediatric nurse reports Anna's excellent progress. The English teacher notes Greta's strong attendance and quick learning. The childcare volunteers comment on her warm interactions with other children and helpful attitude. Dorothy smiles as she looks up from her papers. "You're doing remarkably well," Dorothy says to the translator, though Greta now understands much of the English directly. "We'd like to discuss your future plans. Have you thought about what you want to do, where you want to live, whether you'd consider immigration? What kind of work interests you?" The question shifts the conversation from survival to possibility, from managing crisis to planning future. Greta realizes that the Americans view her not as a problem requiring resolution, but as a person with agency and potential, someone capable of building a life with appropriate support and resources. This recognition transforms her self-perception. She begins seeing herself not as a victim of circumstances or a dependent requiring charity, but as a capable person temporarily needing help while transitioning to independence. Over the following months, Greta's transformation continues with consistent support from the American military government programs. On July 15th, she enrolls in a vocational training program that teaches secretarial skills, typing, filing, business correspondence, office procedures. The program operates 5 mornings per week, with childcare provided through the Red Cross volunteers, so Anna remains nearby while Greta attends classes. The American instructors teach practical skills using methods that respect students' intelligence and previous education, acknowledging that many German women possess strong educational backgrounds disrupted by war circumstances. Secretarial training program serves approximately 340 women across multiple displaced persons facilities in Bavaria by August 1945, preparing participants for employment with occupation authorities, reconstruction contractors, and eventually German businesses as economic activity resumes. The American military government recognizes that Germany will need educated workers to rebuild infrastructure, government services, and economic systems. Training programs serve both humanitarian purposes, providing displaced persons with employment paths towards self-sufficiency, and practical reconstruction needs by developing skilled workforce. Greta excels in the program, her middle-class education and natural aptitude for language making her a strong student. By September, she types 45 words per minute with reasonable accuracy, masters basic office procedures, and corresponds in English at an intermediate level. Her instructor recommends her for a position with the Military Government Civil Administration Office in Munich, handling correspondence and filing related to reconstruction projects. The position offers stable employment, adequate salary, and housing assistance that will allow Greta and Anna to move from the displaced persons facility into independent accommodation. On October 3, 1945, Greta begins her new job at the Munich Military Government Office. She arrives for her first day carrying Anna, nervous about managing employment responsibilities while caring for an infant. Her supervisor, an American civilian administrator named Robert Mitchell, immediately addresses the concern. The office maintains a small nursery space where several employees' children stay during working hours, attended by a German woman hired specifically for childcare. The arrangement allows Greta to nurse Anna during breaks while maintaining professional responsibilities, balancing motherhood and employment in ways that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. The symbolic chocolate makes its final appearance on October 12th. When Robert Mitchell distributes small packages to office staff as a gesture of appreciation for their work during the challenging first months of occupation, administration. Each package contains several Hershey's bars, chewing gum, coffee, and a typed note thanking employees for their dedication to reconstruction efforts. Greta reads the note carefully, touched by the recognition that her work matters and contributes to positive purposes. She saves one chocolate bar to share with Margaret when she visits the displaced persons facility on Sunday, wanting to thank the volunteer who showed her such kindness during the most uncertain period of her life. That Sunday visit, October 14th, provides Greta with perspective on her transformation. She walks through the facility where she lived for 5 months, now seeing it through different eyes. New arrivals occupy the same space where she once sat clutching Anna in fear, and she recognizes her own earlier anxiety in their tense faces and uncertain movements. She volunteers to speak with several new mothers, sharing her experience and offering reassurance that the Americans genuinely intend to help, that the program's work as promised, that keeping families together remains the actual policy rather than propaganda. One young woman, 19-year-old Frida with a 3-month-old son, listens to Greta's story with obvious skepticism. Her experience mirrors Greta's earlier expectations. She anticipates separation, judgment, harsh treatment reflecting Germany's defeat. Greta shares the chocolate bar with Frida, breaking off pieces as Margaret once did for the children, explaining how this small gesture represented a larger philosophy that eventually transformed her circumstances. She doesn't know if Frida believes her, but she plants seeds of hope that might help the younger woman navigate the uncertain weeks ahead with slightly less fear. Throughout 1946, Greta's life stabilizes progressively. She continues her employment with the military government office, receiving promotions that reflect her growing skills and reliability. She moves into a small apartment in Munich's Schwabing district, part of a housing program that provides subsidized accommodation for displaced persons achieving employment. The apartment includes 2 rooms, basic furniture, and shared kitchen facilities, modest but adequate, offering security and privacy she deeply appreciates after months in communal facilities. Anna grows into a healthy, curious toddler who begins walking at 11 months and speaking her first words, mixing German and English in ways that make Greta smile. The child has no memory of those frightening early months, no awareness of how close they came to completely different circumstances. She knows only security, routine, and her mother's consistent loving care, supplemented by occasional visits from Margaret and other volunteers, who remain involved in displaced person support, even as many families transition to independence. In April 1946, Greta receives news that Wilhelm died in Soviet captivity in February 1945, 3 months before Germany's surrender. The confirmation brings grief but also closure, allowing her to mourn definitively rather than existing in uncertain limbo. The American Red Cross helps her navigate the bureaucratic processes for obtaining official documentation of Wilhelm's death, necessary for accessing widows' benefits and eventually making legal decisions about her and Anna's future. The organization's support extends beyond immediate humanitarian relief to practical assistance with navigating complex administrative systems during a period of institutional disruption and reconstruction. By December 1946, Greta contemplates immigration to the United States. The American military government establishes immigration programs for displaced persons, recognizing that many individuals have no viable path to rebuilding lives in Germany due to destroyed homes, dead family members, and traumatized communities. The Displaced Persons Act, under consideration in the U.S. Congress, will eventually allow approximately 400,000 displaced persons to immigrate to America between 1948 and 1952. Greta begins gathering documentation, attending information sessions, completing applications that might eventually allow her and Anna to start completely fresh in a country that showed them unexpected kindness during their most vulnerable period. 23 years later, May 1969, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Greta Muller, now Greta Morrison, having married an American engineer named Thomas Morrison in 1951 stands in the arrivals area of Philadelphia International Airport, holding a small sign with a name written in careful letters, Dorothy Harrison. Her hands remain steady this time. No trembling anxiety like that distant day in Bavaria when she clutched infant Anna in fearful uncertainty. At 47 years old, Greta embodies successful integration into American life. She works as an office manager for an architectural firm, owns a comfortable house in suburban Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and raised Anna into a confident young woman now attending Bryn Mawr College. The reunion happening today closes a circle 24 years in the making. Greta maintained correspondence with Dorothy after immigrating to America in 1949, exchanging holiday cards and occasional letters, updating each other on life developments. When Greta learned that Dorothy planned to visit Philadelphia for a social work conference, she insisted on meeting her former caseworker, wanting to express gratitude that she struggled to adequately convey through written words. Anna, now 24 and studying psychology, joins her mother at the airport, curious to meet the woman who shaped their lives during those crucial early months. Dorothy emerges from the arrival gate at 62 years old, her hair gray but her energy and warm smile unchanged. She spots Greta immediately, and the two women embrace with genuine affection that transcends their previous professional relationship. They move to a quiet corner of the airport, settling into chairs where they can talk without the bustle of travelers flowing around them. Anna sits beside her mother, listening as the women reconnect after years of separation. "You look wonderful," Dorothy tells Greta with evident pleasure. "When I read your letters describing your life here, I felt such satisfaction knowing our programs worked as we hoped they would. You and Anna represent exactly what we aim to achieve: stable families building positive futures." Greta reaches into her purse and retrieves a small object wrapped in tissue paper. She unfolds the paper carefully, revealing a faded Hershey's chocolate wrapper, the same one she received during her first days at the displaced persons facility in May 1945. She kept it all these years, carrying it through her transition to independence in Munich, packing it carefully when she immigrated to America, storing it in her personal papers as a tangible reminder of transformation. "This chocolate bar changed everything for me," Greta explains, her English now fluent with only slight accent. "Not because of the chocolate itself, but because it represented something I didn't expect, that you saw me as a human being who deserved small luxuries, not just survival. That symbolic gesture gave me hope when I had none." Dorothy takes the wrapper gently, turning it over in her hands with visible emotion. "We understood that treating people with dignity required more than meeting basic needs. The psychological aspects mattered as much as the physical. Small gestures communicated respect and possibility." She pauses, then continues, "I worked with thousands of displaced persons between 1945 and 1947. And I often wondered about individual outcomes. Hearing that you built such a successful life brings me tremendous joy." Anna speaks up, her voice reflecting the confidence of young American womanhood. "I'm studying psychology because I want to understand how people recover from trauma and build resilience. My mother's story taught me that human beings can transform incredibly when they receive appropriate support. I wouldn't exist as the person I am without the programs you helped administer." The conversation continues for over an hour, weaving between memory and present reality. Dorothy shares that approximately 68% of displaced persons who passed through American facilities in Germany between 1945 and 1949 achieved stable outcomes, either successful reintegration into German society, immigration to new countries, or reunification with surviving family members. The programs cost substantial resources but generated positive long-term results that justified the investment. She mentions that many social welfare approaches developed during displacement, crisis management influenced American domestic policy in subsequent decades, demonstrating how practices tested in extreme circumstances can inform normal times programs. Greta describes her path to immigration, the 18-month wait after applying, the sponsorship from a Philadelphia church that committed to helping her establish housing and employment, the challenges of adapting to American culture while maintaining connection to German heritage. She talks about meeting Thomas, a kind man whose own father immigrated from Scotland, who understood the immigrant experience and embraced both Greta and Anna without judgment or resentment about her German background. She describes watching Anna grow up as an American child with German mother, navigating dual cultural identity that enriches rather than confuses her self-understanding. Sometimes I tell people about those months in Bavaria after the war, Greta says quietly, and they don't believe me. They assume occupation was harsh, that we suffered retribution for Germany's actions. When I explain how Americans treated us, the medical care, the nutrition programs, the vocational training, the family support, they think I exaggerate or misremember. But I have documentation, letters, this chocolate wrapper. The kindness was real and institutional, not just individual goodwill. Dorothy nods with understanding. The political debate about occupation policy was intense. Some American leaders wanted punitive approaches, arguing that Germany deserved harsh treatment. But wiser voices prevailed, recognizing that rebuilding stable, democratic Germany required treating civilians humanely, especially vulnerable populations like women and children. The Marshall Plan investment beginning in 1948 extended that philosophy to economic reconstruction. The results speak for themselves. West Germany became a stable democracy and strong ally rather than breeding ground for resentment and extremism. The parallel historical trajectories hang unspoken. Between them, the contrast between American occupation approaches in Western Germany versus Soviet approaches in Eastern Germany. The divergent outcomes that emerged from different philosophies about how to treat defeated enemy populations. Greta knows several women from the displaced persons facility who ended up in Soviet-occupied areas and experienced radically different circumstances: separation from children, forced labor, minimal resources, treatment that emphasized punishment rather than rehabilitation. Geography and chance determined which system would shape her life. And she remains conscious of her fortune in falling within American jurisdiction. Before parting, Greta gives Dorothy a photograph of Anna at her college graduation earlier that month. Anna wears academic regalia, standing between her mother and stepfather, smiling with the confidence of a young woman with stable foundation and positive future. Dorothy studies the image with satisfaction, recognizing that the infant she evaluated 24 years earlier in a converted military barracks flourished into exactly the kind of contributing citizen that occupation programs aim to nurture. Keep changing the world. Dorothy tells Anna as they prepare to leave, "Your generation has opportunities that your mother's generation never imagined. Use them well, and remember that small acts of kindness ripple forward in ways we cannot predict." Greta Morrison continues living in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, where she remains active in German-American cultural organizations and volunteer programs supporting immigrant families. Anna completes her psychology doctorate in 1975 and dedicates her career to family therapy, working particularly with refugee families adapting to American life. The chocolate wrapper stays preserved in a small frame in Greta's study, a tangible reminder that expectations can transform completely when people receive treatment that recognizes their full humanity. The statistical evidence supports Greta's individual experience as representative of broader patterns. Between 1945 and 1952, approximately 850,000 displaced persons passed through American military government programs in occupied Germany. Of these, approximately 410,000 eventually immigrated to the United States, Canada, Australia, and other countries accepting refugees. Follow-up studies conducted in the 1960s found that displaced persons who received comprehensive family support during their displacement period showed significantly better long-term outcomes in education, employment, mental health, and community integration compared to those who experienced family separation or minimal support during displacement. The American military government's investment in maintaining family units and providing robust support services during the immediate post-war period cost approximately $312 million between 1945 and 1949. This represented substantial expenditure during a period of competing priorities. But the long-term returns, in terms of stable German reconstruction, successful immigrant integration, and prevention of humanitarian crises that might have generated ongoing security concerns, far exceeded the initial investment. The approach demonstrated that treating defeated enemy populations humanely serves both moral imperatives and practical strategic interests. The symbolic significance of small gestures like the chocolate bar extends beyond individual psychological impact. These details represented institutional philosophy that recognized human beings require dignity, hope, and small joys alongside basic survival needs. The inclusion of modest luxuries in displaced persons' rations reflected American abundance, yes, but more importantly communicated respect for displaced persons as people deserving consideration beyond minimal adequacy. This philosophy shaped interactions throughout the occupation period and influenced how Germans perceived American intentions, facilitating cooperation and eventual alliance that transformed former enemies into partners in maintaining democratic stability. Greta's story, replicated in hundreds of thousands of variations across occupied Germany, illuminates a crucial historical lesson: how victors treat defeated populations shapes long-term outcomes profoundly. The choice to maintain family bonds, provide comprehensive support, offer paths to self-sufficiency, and recognize human dignity even in conquered enemy populations generated positive results that reverberated across generations. Anna Morrison's career serving refugee families represents one tiny ripple from decisions made in 1945 by administrators like Dorothy Harrison, who understood that responding to humanitarian crisis with generosity rather than retribution serves everyone's interests ultimately. The contrast between Greta's experience and what she feared in May 1945 could not be more complete. She expected separation, judgment, harsh efficiency focused on managing problems. She received family preservation, medical care, nutritional support, vocational training, and eventual immigration opportunity that allowed her to build a stable, successful life. The gap between expectation and reality transformed not just her circumstances but her fundamental understanding of what becomes possible when institutions commit to treating vulnerable populations humanely. Today, the lessons from American occupation policies in post-war Germany inform international humanitarian response frameworks.